Hello there guys, what is going on? Son of Chelsea back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Monday. Hope you've had a good start to your week wherever you're watching this. A big week for Chelsea, obviously, with the Champions League, the group stage, AC Milan on Wednesday. Team selector is going to be out tomorrow previewing the game. So hopefully it will be a positive week for Chelsea after that win against Crystal Palace on Saturday. But in today's video, Christopher Nkunku, the player we were speaking about last night, it seemed that things had been progressing, or at least to a stage where Chelsea feel confident they could sort of lead that race going in for Nkunku next year. But now it seems that we are close to securing a deal, or in some quarters, Chelsea have agreed a deal with the player and are willing to pay Leipzig for his services for next season, the 2023-24 campaign, along with another Leipzig player we will be speaking about as well that Chelsea could be going in for too. And on top of that, to finish off today's episode, a piece that I wrote today for Football London regarding a recent trip to Cobham. But before we get into any of that good stuff today, I want to ask you guys, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads this month on the channel. We've had one game down, 8 to go this month, so tons of stuff to speak about on the channel. Also, do me a massive favor, if you're enjoying the content, hit that like button because it helps new people find the channel as well. But let's get into it. David Ornstein in The Athletic this morning in his regular column, Nkunku to Chelsea agreed. News emerged last week that Chelsea have moved for Christopher Nkunku, with the Leipzig player undergoing medical tests prior to a proposed move for the 23-24 season. There has been some conjecture as to the status of the situation, but The Athletic is told Nkunku has signed a pre-contract agreement with the West Londoners, and that the Premier League side have committed to paying their German Bundesliga counterparts a price in excess of the 24-year-old's €60 million release clause. That works out about £52 million. With the clause not coming into effect until this campaign is over, Chelsea are spending a higher figure to secure Nkunku in advance and avoid a potentially intense battle for his services. Sources close to the matter say Chelsea have overcome competition, including from other leading English teams, to make the 8-cap France international a fundamental part of the rebuild going on at Stamford Bridge. I know some people will be cautious when they hear about words like done and dusted, which I believe Ornstein said regarding this piece in a podcast for The Athletic today. We think back to the summer, Rafinha, Jules Koundé, Christoph Freund as well recently. Sure, things could still go wrong, but I do think those scenarios, particularly the first two regarding players and transfers, would have been key lessons for the new ownership group, particularly Todd Boehly, in getting those things done. And there is context, particularly on the Rafinha front, of Barcelona kind of having a deal done with the player well in advance of the window opening, and that's something that Chelsea obviously could not do with a lot of players and a lot of situations internally. You think about Rudiger, Christensen, the contract situation, because of the sanctions, because of the change in ownership. That hasn't been the case this year, and Chelsea quite clearly are moving actively to get deals done as quickly as possible, and it seems like Nkunku is going to be one of those. On top of that, Matt Law here in the Telegraph, Chelsea hope to sign Josev Gvardiol on top of signing Nkunku. Just as Chelsea have capitalised on Nkunku's situation, Gvardiol has a release clause in the Leipzig contract he signed this summer following interest from Chelsea. So Gvardiol is a player we have heard about before, absolutely. And regarding sort of defence, it was kind of touted that Tuchel was very much pushing that, but obviously he is no longer head coach. But Gvardiol is a player across Europe that I think is gaining a lot of attention. I think I may have spoken about it on the channel that Man City are another club interested in him. So in the case of both Nkunku and Gvardiol, Chelsea are moving quickly. How does that work out in terms of the defensive situation? We've got Ethan Ampadu and Levi Colwill on loan today, have futures at the club now. Graham Potter is here, particularly in the case of Levi Colwill, because of course he left to go to Brighton when Graham Potter was there. Didn't start a lot of games before he became Chelsea head coach, but that's one to focus on as well. But of course we don't know the future of Thiago Silva. Is it going to be his final year at Chelsea this season? He's playing to a pretty good level right now. But let's move back to Nkunku. I don't want to repeat what I said last night regarding Nkunku, regarding my sort of reservations, more so in the case of are there other priority areas, but in terms of what Nkunku positively could do for Chelsea, this is quite clearly someone who has gained a lot of respect, a lot of admiration and a lot of interest from top clubs across Europe. And I said this last night, I will say it again just in case people didn't hear me. just because one player from a certain club in the Bundesliga failed does not mean we don't sign Bundesliga players for the rest of history. And it doesn't mean that you can kind of take one example. It's kind of like Haaland is doing incredibly well right now. That doesn't mean that like every other player is going to be like him. And it's the same with Timo Werner, right? Just because one player drastically fails after moving from the Bundesliga, that, you know, I think in both cases they are kind of extremes. It looks like one massively fails to adapt, another one looks like a freak of nature who has adapted so quickly, and it looks like he's going to be an amazing player in the Premier League, at least from what we've seen so far. You're looking for things in the middle. You're looking for kind of a general trend, and we have seen, I did obviously reference Heung-min Son and Roberto Firmino. I think Jadon Sancho will turn out to be a very good player for Man United as well. Listen, Nkunku, I think that Liam Toomey did a really good piece in The Athletic as well today, sort of an analysis piece regarding what Chelsea would get with Nkunku, how his talent will translate from the Bundesliga, because that is a concern. Just going through some of the numbers here that Toomey references, Nkunku's breakthrough season a year ago was spectacular, with his 33 Bundesliga appearances yielding 20 goals, only one of which came from the penalty spot, and 13 assists. That's another part in terms of his creativity and his versatility to play as an attacking midfielder that I do think is relevant here, particularly with a coach like Potter, who quite clearly wants to be versatile with players. He wants to kind of shapeshift players. We've seen this throughout his career, and Nkunku is absolutely one of those kind of modern attackers that can play in a variety of positions, can be fluid, which is kind of a lazy term, but I think that's the way to describe him. He isn't kind of limited and set on one position and one style of play. At least that's what we hope if he was to arrive at Chelsea next season. He also netted 11 times in 12 matches across the Champions League group stage and Europa League knockout phase, and 4 in 6 as Leipzig won the DFB Pokal, Germany's FA Cup. The current one has started in impressive fashion as well on a domestic level, with Nkunku scoring 6 times in 8 Bundesliga appearances. I've said this, you know, it's quite clear that Nkunku is a good player, and I think that piece from Liam Toomey that I suggest you go and read kind of delves into, as I say, the variety in his game. You see him score a different type of goal. It isn't just kind of one. I've seen him score goals in the Europa League, one against Rangers last year. I think it was in the semi-final. It was really impressive. It was a whipped ball in from the left-hand side. It was a one sort of touch, like almost a half-volley finish into the top corner. Really impressive. His sort of interplay, I think his technique, which is something that you absolutely need, but particularly in the Premier League where Chelsea are usually up against the low block, it's how a player deals with that and deals with a number of opponents in front of them in tighter areas. That is always a big question. It's something that Werner, for comparison, just struggled with. He just couldn't do it. I think Nkunku, from what I've seen, has a higher level of technique, and as well, if he was to come in and be someone that could play as maybe in a 4-2-3-1, for instance, he could play off a striker, he could play to the left, he could play in a free, where if we've got Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, you've got Raheem Sterling, you've got Mason Mount, you've got Kai Havertz, you maybe have Callum Hudson-Odoi returning, who knows. There are a lot of players he could play off, and listen, I think that when you look at Rafa Leao, another player that Chelsea have targeted, they aren't exactly the similar player. I referenced this last week. There is a pressing difference between both of those players, and I think Nkunku absolutely suits more of what I think Potter would want to do in terms of a pressing team. And coming from a club like Leipzig, it's quite obvious in the Bundesliga too. I'm encouraged and excited that I think that Nkunku, if you just... Of course, any player that Chelsea sign, I want them to do extremely well. I want them to do perfectly. I want them to excel. And we really hope that, as I say, the last time we bought from Leipzig, that is just an anomaly of how bad it was. And I do think a lot of it is very much an anomaly. And I think that Nkunku hopefully will come to the Premier League, if it is done and dusted, and can hopefully do a really good job for Chelsea. I still do stress that the attack itself, I think, has enough talent within it currently to improve at least a little bit, and hopefully by the time he arrives in an area that is a lot more confident about itself. You have Raheem Sterling scoring consistently. You hopefully have Aubameyang off the back of a good season. Of course, I'm all dreaming this stuff up at the moment based off one win, but I really do hope that by the time he arrives, he isn't looked at as the saviour anymore, because we have had so much of that in recent seasons. Let me know your opinions on Nkunku and also Gvardiol. What do you think about him? Do you think this is a player Chelsea should be targeting as well? And sort of Boehly's fast action in the transfer market, let me know in the comments below. Before we do go, I don't want to spend a massive amount of time on this, because it is maybe a little bit pretentious to kind of shout out one of my articles for Football London that I did release today. I was very fortunate to go to Cobham last week. Chelsea have announced today a partnership with AI Scout, which is kind of this. Originally, it started off as an app to kind of help amateur players get into elite academies, but it's kind of going to work apparently as a thing that's going to be very integral to the club's Chelsea's sort of academy recruitment. Data with players currently in the academy, even leading up to the first team. Got to see how it worked. Very high tech, in terms of data analysis and kind of this performance lab, they call it, elite performance lab, that they have sort of set up at Cobham currently. You saw a lot of like data and analysis, and also it looked a little bit like something out of James Bond. I mean, it was kind of very high tech, a lot of data that maybe a lot of us don't understand, but it was interesting speaking to Jim Fraser, who is very much a big person in terms of Chelsea Academy, head of sort of recruitment scouting. We also got to speak to Ben Smith, who is head of research and innovation at the club. Please go and read the piece if you are interested in that. I found it interesting, and I do reference this in the piece kind of critically, in terms of there are so many variables in terms of not only how you use data, how players develop over their careers, but also at the top level, that elite demand. And it kind of is referencing Nkunku here. You can get a young player, you can develop them, but then Chelsea, there is always going to be this demand at the elite level, this kind of friction that we constantly see of a demand to buy new players, of a demand for instant results. And whether Todd Boehly, the new ownership, are going to kind of change that feeling, and we do see more of a consistent pathway, there is always that friction and demand as well from supporters to see those results, because Chelsea have been at the highest level for so long now. And whether things like this, and it kind of relates to a question I asked in terms of communication when Boehly said at that conference a few weeks ago, sort of the lack of sharing of data. He used that word between Cobham, between sort of all facets of the club, and he wants to kind of break down those barriers at the club. And I felt very much that AI Scout, although apparently it has been developed over a number of years with Chelsea before Boehly took over and the new consortium took over, it does feel like something that very much links in with that kind of feeling of communication. You hope from the side of Chelsea, it gets them some incredible players, really unearths players that maybe they wouldn't find before, and hopefully the data is used in a positive way. But it all comes down to, when those players get to the academy, can they make that step up? Are they good enough to make that step up? But also, will they get those opportunities, which is always such a big question mark at a club like Chelsea, and is always one of those things. So please go and read the piece if you are interested in it, because it's a curious announcement, and I think in terms of data, right, I find it quite fascinating how clubs use it. They are quite elusive and kind of hard to nail down, because of course I think a lot of clubs want to be a step ahead of the competition, aren't always forthcoming in terms of how they use that data, and I think that is understandable, to be honest. But it was a good experience, and I hope you guys enjoy reading the piece. But that is it for today's episode of Let's Talk Chelsea. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads on the channel. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.